Thank you for tuning into Gods, Demons, and Magic. This is your host, Sri Sachinandan Das. We're continuing to explore the Egyptian mysteries by Iamblichus. And in this particular text, the Egyptian priest Abaman is explaining the nature of the supernatural world of gods and daemons and subtle beings to the Greek philosopher Porphyry. And in this text, Iamblichus is really presenting the practice of theurgy, or contacting the gods through what we would consider ritual magic, the performance of certain rituals along with different prayers and practices in order to call a god down directly into the room. Just like if you have, and even in modern ritual magic, there's the idea of calling forth various supernatural beings and ghosts or demons or whatever it may be that one is trying to call forth. And you actually, you have like a magic circle and perhaps a triangle, or there's a certain space in which you're calling this subtle entity into. And the entity is expected to materialize there right before you. So with these Egyptian priests, they would actually do that with the gods themselves. They would actually try to bring the gods right down into the room, which is a pretty intense and powerful practice. And in this text, it's really advocated for that this is an extremely purifying experience. And with the right attitude, you can interact with these gods and become purified in their association. It's just like basically you call them forth and you hang out with them, and you develop a relationship with them. And through that relationship, your consciousness becomes extremely purified. And this is the process of spiritual realization. And Iamblichus is a Neoplatonist, and in his tradition, especially with Porphyry, they very much favored at the time astrology, finding one's personal daemon and propitiating that daemon through various sacrifices. This was all discussed in previous podcasts. But Iamblichus, he's really sort of cutting edge, he's really throwing himself out there by performing these Egyptian rituals. He thinks that this is adding this to Neoplatonic philosophy is a very powerful combination. You take the Neoplatonic philosophy and then you mix it with the magical practices of Egyptian priests who are able to summon gods and all sorts of entities down into, their sacred place. And so many of the questions have to deal with this. And as we're moving forward in this text, more and more we're going to be discussing what it's like when those gods actually enter into the room. What are the various symptoms of their appearance and stuff like that. So it's all very fascinating. So one of the questions that Porphyry asks in the text is, are the gods compelled to a summons? This is like, for example, in ritual magic, you may perform some ritual using the name of a particular demon or ghost or deity, and you're actually forcing or binding that demon to your will. And so Porphyry's asking a good question. Is this what's happening with the gods when you sort of call them down into your sacred space through ritual? Are they forced to come? Like, are they dragged down from the heavens? And so the answer is, of course, no. It's by the divine will. It's by the divine purpose of the absolute good. As we've seen in previous podcasts, that the spiritual platform, the powerful transcendental essence, you might even say God himself, is there beyond matter, exists in the spiritual world. And then his power or his beauty, it's brought down into the world and shines through the realm of the gods. And it's really one divine power, and it emanates just as the sun shines light everywhere, and that light touches upon all things and transforms and warms all things with its power. So similarly, the power of the transcendental platform, the one or the good or God, it manifests through the gods and shines like a light throughout the universe, touching all things and imbuing them with spiritual potency and with beauty and with all the qualities of transcendence. And so this sort of, when one actually summons the gods and interacts with the gods, it's not so much that they're coming under your power, but rather that you are sort of being harmonized with them by the higher divine will. It's like you're brought into harmony with the higher purpose and laws of nature, and therefore your interaction with the gods is a completely spiritual affair. And also, it's not so much that the gods are coming downward into the earthly plane. You're there in your temple or something like that, and you're calling them down into this special room, this dark room in the basement or something, and the gods are somehow appearing in the basement. No, they're not coming down to the earthly plane. Rather, you're sort of rising your consciousness up to them. And they're sort of staying in the one place that they exist, or rather, you're rather tuning your own environment into the God. It's like that basement is being transferred into the heavens, and then a gateway is opening and the light of the heavens is shining through, rather than the God descending down to interact with you. And it mentions there that this sort of divine purpose of why you're allowed to do this is that you're entering into the chorus of the gods. And just like you might see in sort of from a Christian perspective, there's that famous painting of Dante's Inferno where Virgil and Dante are sort of standing on a cliffside looking out and seeing sort of the shining, brilliant, luminous circle of God, with light shining everywhere, and then you can see the angels circulating around this brilliant circle in the sky, and they're all sort of moving around, and singing the glories of God. So it's in this sort of pre-Christian conception, or in this pagan conception, you simply replace the conception of angels with that of the gods. And so the gods are also considered to be rotating around the divine platform, around the supreme God, and all offering their prayers. And so by you sort of contacting the realm of the gods and moving upwards towards their consciousness and interacting with them, you're also being brought into that, ever revolving circular chorus of the gods towards the absolute platform, or the transcendental platform. And everyone's sort of bathed within the light of the divine. And so this is a powerful spiritual experience. And so it's not so much that, in other words, it's not simply that you're trying to access the realm of the divine, but rather the divine is arranging for you to participate in this glorious song. And also, it should be noted that what's being said in the text is that this experience of sort of rising up into the consciousness of the gods and into their association, it gives one the power of renunciation towards material temptation. It's like, how did these great sages practice celibacy and, abstinence from animal flesh and all these various materialistic things which might draw the consciousness down? Well, it's because of their association with the gods. Like, you call down the gods and you experience that a few times, or you experience it regularly, and you become purified and you lose a taste for the lower things. So like it was mentioned earlier, that the temptations towards the materialistic things of life, lust and greed and anger, what it is, according to this particular philosophy, is that you're being attracted to lower daemons or lower spirits that really embody or represent lower aspects of consciousness within the universe. And when you're drawn to or attracted to those things, you're essentially attracted to that particular daemon, or you're tuning in your consciousness to that daemon's level of consciousness. You're tuning into a lower spirit, essentially. Like, for example, if you see, there's something you shouldn't, there's some temptation, a man or a woman that you shouldn't be lustful towards. It's from their perspective, that lust that you feel, that nagging feeling which is calling you to sort of degrade your consciousness and to perhaps even destroy your life, that is the calling, or that you're tuning into the lower vibration of a lower spirit. And so by regularly associating with these higher spirits, it strengthens you so that you're no longer attracted to that. You're no longer drawn to these lower daemons. So it gives you the power of renunciation. So it's very interesting because, if you look in other religious traditions, you'll see that the power of renunciation, perhaps you have a Christian monk or something, is praying to God for the power to somehow or other resist temptation. So it's very similar with these mystics, these Egyptian mystics, except they would call the gods into their association and sort of absorb that light and that power. And then they would be purified for some time, and they would have the strength to resist temptation. And so ultimately, it's quite interesting that these Egyptian mystics and priests, what they saw the gods for was not simply they're worshiping them to get some material thing. That wasn't really their interest. Their interest was to rise towards spiritual perfection, to eventually live in harmony with that transcendental platform, or you might say submit to God. And the gods, the communion with the gods, the lower gods, the gods of this world, the gods that live within matter, was a way in which they did it. And they communicated with them and communed with them through magical ritual. So it's a very fascinating spiritual process. And this process was called the safe return, because their understanding was that the souls of human beings, that we came not from the world, but rather we originally came from that divine transcendental place. We came from the kingdom of God, or we came from the one or the good, and we incarnated into this world, and we're essentially trapped within these bodies. And that the soul is therefore not really human. We may be embodied as a human, but we're not humans. We're souls. We're spiritual sparks of the divine. And so the gods, by their association, by kind of bathing in their light, we're brought back to that original consciousness of ourself. We're brought back to soul consciousness, and we no longer identify with or see reality through the lens of being a human. And therefore we transcend human consciousness. So the spiritual spark of the soul, it's beyond even human consciousness. It's sort of narrowed and sees reality through the very small lens of the human being. It's almost like if you have the sun shining and then you have a small, you're in a dark room looking through the window, that is or perhaps to put it better, if you take the sun and somehow put it in a box, and then there's a tiny little hole in that box, like the size of a quarter. And then the light that emanates from that hole, is all that you're able to see the world with. So it's kind of like the soul, and trapped within a human body, it's experiencing a very great narrowing of its consciousness. And the light of the soul is only able to perceive a very small portion of its potential. But what association with the gods does is it starts to break down those walls so that the soul begins to shine out from its own strength and not simply through the small hole of human consciousness. And so essentially by associating with the gods, you become like the gods, who are much more bright and powerful, And so this is why the Egyptian priests and mystics were considered to have powers. Because as you raise your consciousness like that and transcend human consciousness, sort of the narrowing of consciousness through the human field of vision, then your own consciousness, it's able to do things which are superhuman, right? Which are beyond the human ability, because you're no longer confined to that narrow space. And so you associate with them, and through this process you purify yourself of the passions, which again is considered to be immersion of the consciousness in the lower daemons, which rule things like lust and greed and ignorance. And we shouldn't also, according to Abaman, we shouldn't consider that the gods are selfishly motivated. Sometimes people have the idea that when you call down the gods, whether it be through a sacrifice or through some sort of magic ritual, that the gods are coming because they want something from you. Just like you're driven by lust or greed, and you want something from the gods, something material, so then the gods are also driven by lust and greed, and they're coming down to get something from you. They want some favor from humans. But that, according to the Egyptian priest Abaman, he's saying this is not true. First of all, you shouldn't go towards the gods being driven by desires which are essentially driven by lower daemons, such as lust and greed. You should go to the gods for spiritual advancement, for enlightenment. And similarly, the gods, they are beyond lust and greed and all these qualities, and their interaction with you is simply mercy, trying to uplift you towards higher levels of spiritual consciousness. So ultimately, it's not that the gods are being dragged down or coming into our world or into our consciousness. We're uplifting our own consciousness into their world, their platform of purity. So we're essentially tuning into a higher frequency of consciousness by contacting them. So Porphyry had also asked about the prayers that are to the gods when they're invoked, that sometimes they're invoked in such a way that you speak to them like you're propitiating their wrath, like they're angry and you're sort of approaching in this humble way. Please don't burn me alive. Oh great God, be satisfied. Don't be angry anymore. And so Porphyry asks, why is it like this? Like, why are they always asking like this? And so Abaman answers that the gods, they're not angry at all, actually. They're not angry in the sense that they're mad at you, or they're mad at society in general or something like that, and they have to be placated in their anger. They're not mad. What is their anger is actually us turning away from them. It's essentially like what darkness is within human consciousness is the absence of the gods. It's just like you can, the sun can be shining in the middle of the day, and you can be inside your house and you shut out all the light, close all the curtains, or put up tinfoil. Some people do that, like drug addicts will put up tinfoil and stuff in the windows to somehow or other make it dark, You want to block out the light of the sun. So there's a sense in which there's a darkness before our eyes imposed upon ourselves. We've tuned out the light of the gods, which is actually shining everywhere around us. And so darkness is really a kind of turning away from the light within our own vision. And so when you're propitiating them to remove their anger, what you're asking them to do is to reattune, please help me to reattune myself to that light, and essentially to throw open the windows and let the light in. You're sort of like praying to the gods, and then a small beam of light sort of starts pushing through the window, blasts through the tinfoil, or whatever. And then that light starts to grow and grow and grow until gradually all the curtains fall and the light is just beaming into your house, so bright that you're in awe, right? And so it's that sort of darkness that is being asked to be, it's being asked to be removed in a very humble way. Like, please, I'm begging you, please remove that darkness of my own vision. And therefore, the way that you ask it is as if the gods are very angry or disturbed at you, or have driven you from their association. Like, please allow me to return. This is especially also just like a personal comment. If you think about these ancient cultures, these agricultural cultures based on, very tight family units and on, small tight-knit farm communities and villages, then being ostracized from the community meant death, right? Like if you've done something bad or sinful or criminal, you'll be driven out from the association of your friends and family, and you could possibly starve, or be beaten and killed by the neighboring tribe or neighboring village or group, or even empire, So it was a very dangerous thing to be ostracized. And so the idea that you are in darkness because of your lack of tuning into or looking towards the gods, and that you're asking them to remove their anger, and this is a way of sort of letting that light back in. I would say that this has to do with feeling like you've been ostracized by the gods, or perhaps even you've self-ostracized. And that is included like a feeling that you're criminal or you're sinful, you're like repentant, please allow me back into the village, please allow me back into, to see my family and friends. And so the sort of propitiation of the gods to remove their wrath is very much that mood of, please allow me back into your association to be purified. And Abaman also mentions that when these sacrifices are performed, essentially because the gods are pure, everything that's sacrificed becomes pure. And so this is an important point, and there's an age-old contest or disagreement about this within many ancient traditions and cultures about the validity of sacrificing animals. One side will say that when you sacrifice animals, they become pure. The animal receives a higher birth or a higher position, and the meat that's been offered or the flesh, and now becomes pure by the grace of the gods or the grace of God. And you'll find that position, and then the other side you find chastisement. Like, no, this is not actually proper. This is, first of all, it's violence. It's very dirty. It's filthy, handling blood and flesh and all these things. And animal sacrifice is condemned. So you'll find throughout different ancient religions, you'll find this tension. Is violence and sacrifice to the gods, is it pure or not? And so the Egyptian priest Abamen believes it is. Of course, Greeks such as Plutarch, they'll say no. In fact, Plutarch had said that, basically it is condemned. Especially you can see in many of these animal sacrificing rituals where thousands and hundreds of animals are killed and the blood is being thrown everywhere and stuff like this. He would say that this is actually, you're not really worshiping the gods at all. They're not interested in this animal sacrifice. It's too low for them. It's too gross. And you're only attracting lower spirits and lower demons and ghosts who want to eat such lowly things, such as blood and flesh. And we have to remember, these priests, they're mostly vegetarians, right? And so, also even Plutarch mentions that, such places are filled with ghosts, where these sacrifices of blood are happening. You have kind of like the idea of the hungry ghost you find in Buddhism, where you have a disembodied spirit who has no body in which to gratify his desires, and yet he's burning with desires, and his appetites are ever unsated. And so you have these hungry ghosts running around trying to somehow lick up the blood and stuff. And so he considers it to be very low. And the result of such sacrifices, he says, are plague, war, famine, and large-scale conflict. So, and if we look through this comment sort of through the perspective of the ancient world, when you say that these types of, it's a very strong comment, first of all, when you say that these types of sacrifices bring war and plague and famine, these things are considered to be curses of the gods. They're actually considered to be hugely powerful events within human society in which people have no control. It's kind of like when earthquakes and famines and floods and natural disasters and even war and things like this, they appear to be unstoppable forces which just sort of take over and destroy human society at times. And this is considered to be the wrath of the gods sometimes, or at least their arrangement. So he's actually saying that, you're actually angering the gods with this. You see that this tradition of sacrificing animals, as mentioned previously, it's found in the Odyssey. The idea is that the blood of the animal, there's some kind of vital emanation coming from the blood, some sort of energy which rises out of the fresh blood of a sacrificed animal. And the idea is that supernatural beings and gods, even, that they may enjoy this. And you'll see that even today in various practices of ritual magic, that oftentimes when they're trying to invoke a spirit, they'll sacrifice an animal. They'll sacrifice a chicken or something. And then they'll put the blood, the cut where the wound is there and the blood is pouring out, they'll put it in that triangle or that particular place designated for the spirit to appear. And the idea is that the spirit will use this sort of energy which rises from the blood, and they'll use that energy to manifest themselves. So this is oftentimes in modern magic that'll be replaced with incense smoke. Like somebody will light incense and they're hoping that the spirit will appear in the smoke or something like that. But traditionally, instead of smoke, they use this sort of like this energy which rises off from blood. So this is a very ancient tradition, of course, and so that you could see traces of this particular tension. Should the animal sacrifice be considered sacred or not? So thank you very much for listening. If you found value in this, please like and subscribe. If you're listening on iTunes, please visit srisachinandana.com/iTunes and leave a positive review. Thank you again, and we hope you'll join us next time on Gods, Demons, and Magic.